Peace, peace. This is Brother Moses. I am going live. Have not been live in a couple of minutes now. Don't worry about that as we still work through all the technical difficulties. We will have more content pieces coming out soon enough. And thank you for joining for those who are catching it live and for those who will catch it in the restream. Topic of this conversation is ADOS and FBA, not or and definitely not verse. That's what we're going to be getting into on this conversation. Let's rock out. Yes, sir. Good afternoon. Peace, Sunray. All right. And so, since it seems that we have two that are with us, I guess we'll get into this information. As we know it right now, there was a big push, a big public outcry. There was a big motivation behind getting galvanized about coming together, unifying, and making this opinion politics. So, making an opinion politics. And I think what we'll find as we start to break this down, this information that we have that's available to us today, is that there is a movement underfoot. One that is originating in this reparations first, Black first type of mentality. This, what can we do for us? How do we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps? Where is it that we should be focusing and concentrating our political and social capital? Where should we be concentrating our political and social capital? If there is one area or one thing that we can do here in America, other than just complain or other than just entertain ourselves, living check to check or working towards, these smaller aims, what is that collective vision? Where is that one galvanizing idea? And so that's the idea. Take that one idea that says there is something that we should be focused on. The people who are able to vote, what should they be? What should be on the ballot for them? The people who are likely to vote, what is something that they would likely want to vote on? So you can look at that entire ballot up, down, left, and right. You can analyze the people, you can analyze presidents, and you can go local, you can go state. You'll see things about taxes on there. What up, CRU? You can see things on the distribution of different public services and things, waterworks, utilities. You'll see a lot of things that are on the ballot. And right now, how do you politicize an idea? What idea, or as they like to summarize it as, what is the Black agenda? And do you wait until it's time to cast your ballot before you take part in that political process? And if there is a taking part in that political process, when do you start? Now, I attended Morehouse College. My big brother is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Most notable contributions besides the speeches that he would deliver would have been any of the protests or any of the voter registration activities. So protests and voter registration activities, city to city, state to state. That is one of his primary functions. And so again, we have a collective solution that is deeply rooted in the American solution, which is the right to vote, the right to cast your ballot. And in this process, we are determining what then should be on that ballot. And what is the process that we use in order to get that idea on that ballot? Even if it is voted down, what is the idea? And so doing a little research there, I didn't want people to be distracted too much, but I did want to set that good premise. Mr. RJ Rochelle, let me drop the link in the chat just in case this thing can become more of a conversation rather than just me having an oration. Copy the clipboard. Come on over here. Sun Ray, as my brother, you are more than welcome to leverage that link as well. First and foremost, we know a big driving factor of either of those conversations, whether they are originating from the ADOS camp or they are in the FBA camp, either of those conversations will have to deal with this idea of reparations. They're going to have to wrestle with it. And I think both are trying to develop their talking points around it, but they're going to have to wrestle with it. And so that's why I bring this to you. What is it? Mo Bands? I think my Cash App is Mo Bands. I'm always on the sending. Like I say, I am the treasurer of the B1 network. I am on the sending end. And whenever I find great content produced by Black content creators, I send Cash Apps. What is it? I hit the little, what is the other one? Like if somebody's page is monetized, they'll have Super Chat. If they have an organization, I want to make sure that they're able to keep their donations and things clean. So I'll go through like the PayPal or the actual donate here link, and I contribute that way. So I am a firm believer in supporting Black media, Black content, and Black organizations such as the Ziyex Institute. Try to take care of those teachers and volunteers as well. So let me drop that if I can. It looks like that. Oh, wait, maybe 1 second. And we're going to get into it. Cash App is the $ Mo Bands. There you go. All right. And so where are we? Today we're at this position of where we're looking at ADOS and then this branch, this FBA. I would call it a branch of the entire whole, similar to being able to look at the sports entertainment industry. And you can look at sports entertainment and you can say, well, I really like American baseball. Or you can look and say, I really like the NBA or National Basketball Association. Or you could say, I am a fan of the NFL, the National Federation League, National Football League, or, you know, wrestling or UFC. But it still falls under the greater umbrella of sporting entertainment. And so if you're talking about politics or restorative justice claims, then that is the big umbrella. What do you feel about civil rights or politics and voting and all of that? That is the big umbrella. Democracy is the big umbrella. And you can like whichever arm or wing or branch you decide to go under. Under this conversation, we're looking at the ADOS and FBA. Now, this is important, right? Because you have some people who are drawn to picking sides, right? They are either FBA or ADOS. They don't see them as one big part of the whole. They see the otherizing happening. And then that's why you have to be clear. It's definitely not a verse to where people start believing that ADOS is against the FBA or the FBA is against the ADOS. Now, maybe they may have different points on immigration, different points on the inclusion of people from the Caribbean ancestry or lineage, people from, you know, mixed lineage. They may have different perspectives there, but it's not a one against the other. You may be in the category that says one or the other. I believe that one is better for me than the others. You may even go as far as to say, I believe that one is better for the people. You may look at it at its nuances and say, well, look at the organizational structure. Which one has chapters with real chapter leaders and they're having meetings and they have regularly scheduled meetings, and who's attending those meetings? Which one has alliances? Which one has developed a core set of beliefs that they actually articulate with more consistency? Which one has, and you may look at it from a business sense and say, which one has a better Twitter following? So when they have something that they want to promote, they can get that message out there quickly, in less than 150 characters or 47 characters, however many it might be. Which one aligns better, like my brother CRU says, the political party? Which one is using politics first, or which one is just using the people first? I want my people to understand what it is we're up against. I want my people to come together and have conversations. I want people who identify as, you know, FBA, Foundational Black Americans. I want them to have a space where they can come together and fellowship. Not like church, we're not, you know, no spooky godism, but I want my people to be able to come together and fellowship, whether we're talking politics, whether we're talking entertainment, but our people are starting to come together again. Galvanizing. Remember that. There's a big umbrella, which is like B1 and B1 Black media, a big umbrella. You look at all the medium forms that are available, the Telemundos and Indian television. You look at all the restaurants that are available in your area, and you're talking about restaurants and where you can go to eat. If you're talking about schools, you'll say, well, out of all these places where my Black children can be educated, which one has the curriculum that aligns better with what we would like to see offered? And so the schools, you can see those are predominantly white owned, predominantly white driven, predominantly white information. The restaurants, you'll see a lot of American food offerings, franchises, a lot of capital behind that part of the mainstream business and systems. That's there, it's established. And now you're looking at Black folks saying, well, what about our spaces? What are we doing to actually push, promote, and encourage more patronage of our spaces? How do we get our message out there in the most positive light? That's Black media. That is Black First. That is the Black First or the B1 network. And for me, I'm probably a little bit more liberal and lenient and open than a lot of people would even have a taste for, a preference for, because I think that Black First extends to a great group of people. I don't marginalize it and pigeonhole it so small just yet. I haven't tasted enough bitterness towards those other groups to isolate them out and to otherize them as being, infiltrators or agents. I'll keep in mind that I am a student of history, and so I do know that there is a place for that. I was talking to my brother George Macon earlier, and I said we do have a healthy space for a little bit of schizophrenic or schizophrenia and paranoid when it comes to the agents or infiltration inside of Black spaces. We definitely have a healthy regard towards caution towards who we allow in our spaces. Now that's definitely noted. Drop a pin right there and let that be something that manifests with you. Let's get into some information here, because once we've established this grand idea, look, this is an and. The ADOS and the FBA, there should be an and right there. When you recognize that in the founders, they may disagree, and that's going to be completely all right. You may disagree that they disagree in public. That's going to be all right. But the and is more important than the or. You might be a part of the or camp, so I'm not going to dismiss the way you feel about it if you want to choose one or the other. But it's definitely going to be more advantageous than using a versus and making it seem like we have all of this that we're fighting for in restorative justice. But instead of us fighting for this thing, now we're fighting each other. I think many people who are live with us today and those in the restream would agree that it's probably more advantageous and more productive if we use the and than we use a versus. It's definitely not going to be that verse. If you start going along the camp or find yourself saying ADOS verse FBA, then you probably just got to check it and look and say, oh, wait, damn, I'm doing that same thing, that Booker T. Washington versus W.E.B. Du Bois. I'm doing the Martin Luther King Jr. versus the Malcolm X, rather than saying, look, both people have a relevant cause. If they can generate 10,000 people to follow FBA and to be able to tweet something, and now you got 100 more people attending this conference, or 100 more people showing up at this church, or 1,000 more people ready to protest in Dallas because of that man's tweet and his network's tweets, then I think that is for the cause. It's definitely better than the verses. Just like this and concept, if they both start doing the same thing, FBA and ADOS, they don't have to have the same conference. They can have two separate conferences streamed live at the same time for all I care. And it's still an and, because one will be able to hit those folks who are attending theirs, just like the others will be able to attend theirs. I love that, Irene. Unified armies, multiple fronts, as long as we know that the bigger picture is restorative justice, and having that conversation now to where if it should be progressed with politics, they can have their debate later using our talking points. If we don't think that Candace Owens is the best person to be the only representative to speak at any of those senatorial hearings, then we definitely need that and to push forward. Both networks can have tens of thousands. I think one has like 70,000 Twitter subscribers, 70,000 people. The other may have 100,000. But when one tweets, one may get 10,000 people that finally like it or share that damn tweet. And it's still talking about the same point, which is restorative justice. I think that's strong. Let me see. I'm not logging out. I'm you for now. I don't know what just happened over there. Sister Irene, thanks for joining, man. And I apologize. I know I was supposed to connect with you on a Sunday build. Please charge it to my my notifications, not to my heart, but I definitely want to connect with you. Me and Christianity have gone a long way towards helping me get to where I'm at today. And I don't want to, like, you know, once you go to college, here's my story. You go to college, they break down Christianity and they make it seem like Christianity is this big myth, this big, you know, whatever it is, this big mind control mechanism. And so everything that got me to the point of even attending that college is now supposed to be thrown away. So you have the what is it? What is his name? Ben, Dr. Clark, Dr. Ben. You have those folks who are saying, throw it all away. But there's still the certain elements that I still hold to, like praying and believing. And so I definitely would rather have the conversation than to just say, throw it away. It's not a Bible battle for me, but it is one that still speaks to my heart. So I'll definitely join you on your Sunday show. All right, so here's a little bit of information that I'm doing. So when it gets distracting, don't mind me. I love the fuckery. I can go in and entertain it with the and or the verses or the or. But for me, I'm an and person myself. But understand that it does become a distraction from the real work that has to be put in. What we're trying to establish is a premise. And in this premise, we're trying to establish the government's complicity and therefore liability for reparations. I'm going to say it again a little bit slower. You know, I can talk a little bit quick. But to make this thing political, it has to be something that establishes the government's fault. If you want reparations, something for your children to push through, or if you want reparations, we already know that we are owed. We know that, and we have all the passion we need behind it. But the work that needs to be done, the research that needs to be, and everybody, well, what will research do? What will more words do? What will another meeting do? And that's for them to decide. But it's not for us to say, well, we don't have to do that work. We don't have to show you about this discriminant. We don't have to bring out more descendants and surviving descendants. All we have to do is continue to just tell you, and you should understand. That's not where we're at. We don't have that privilege. We have to play the game of politics if that's where they're going with it, is politics. And so that's where we're at here. And in the research, continuing to find those articles, continuing to find, I guess I go too far back, but I go all the way back. What up, B1 Goat? I go all the way back into the 1600s, Virginia, when I'm looking for the actual covenants, the actual agreements that were signed. And then to say, well, look, the government we can trace it all the way back to 1619 Virginia and give you the history of government complicity since 1619, and then start to lay out those cases. Why is that important? Because you have a person who seems to be uneducated on these areas, who can go all the way to the not the Supreme Court, but to the Senate itself when they're having these Senate hearings. And the only representative that shows up with our skin complexion or from the Black experience to speak on the behalf of all of us goes up there and says, well, white supremacy does not exist. It is a myth of the Democrats. And that is their talking point. And they can go on to include, look, there are some impacts that you may see through the institutional racism or due to institutional racism. And these are the impacts, but they are not due to white supremacy. That is the myth. And if that is going to be the representative that goes up and speaks on our behalf, it is our duty to put forth a better equipped and more honest representative. All right. Likewise, I have not been the biggest proponent for the Congressional Black Caucus or the NAACP. I'm one of the harsher critics. I think it has been co-opted by the LGBT community to and through, and that their agendas are better serving of the diaspora and of immigration than they are for Black agency and advancement today. I don't even want to say that again. I'm going to say it once and drop it right there. But I do love a couple of the people in some of the blueprints or some of the gingerbread crumbs that they've sprinkled along their way, like the late John Conyers. And in this report that you see on the screen, one question. This is some old information here, but I thought it was relevant just to bring out because it speaks to the heart of this ADOS and FBA. I don't even know if you call it I don't know. It's trending topic. See, people want to make it about the rift. They want to make it about the drama. But remember, it's still about restorative justice and what we should be doing to galvanize people around this political process in order to get it on the ballot. What do we have to actually vote on that impacts us? Opportunity zones? Tell me the impact of opportunity zones for Black business real estate people. How many Black real estate investment trusts or REITs are going to be taking advantage of this Opportunity Zone Act? Tell me exact numbers on the First Step Act. Tell me any of that, and I will shut the hell up. See, because what you have is people who are going and asking for specific numbers. Show me the numbers of cases of discrimination, like Brother Moses has been able to show you in the housing discrimination claims, the thousands of housing discrimination claims since the early 90s all the way through to the 2000s. Claims filed by Black people. And then out of all of those claims filed, how many resulted in an action? And what is the percent? And I showed you that the percent of those housing discrimination claims was less than 1% that actually go through with any resolution. So you have thousands of claims processed. And you can have an African American sitting as the head of the housing and urban development. Likewise, you can have an African American attorney general in charge of prosecuting those claims. And you can also encourage African Americans to use the system that's currently in place to your advantage. And you'll have thousands of African Americans who boldly challenge the system and the status quo as it is, and they come forth with a grievance, is what it's called. And they say, I've been discriminated in the form of housing. But less than 1% of those claims are actually pushed through. And you don't even get to see what was the actual result of that claim. So in many cases, when we tell you that there is some institutional things that we have to galvanize around and fight against, we're going to need the and not the or. The or is still going to be strong, because if I can go to the ADOS and in their network find somebody who can help me push forward a claim all the way through, then that would be of a benefit. Likewise, if I can go to the FBA, so the ADOS or the FBA network, and find somebody inside of that network that can help me push through a claim of discrimination through to resolution, then it has a benefit. So the and or the or. But you definitely can't get there if there is a versus. So you tried to go to the ADOS, and rather than finding someone inside of that ADOS network who can help push forward a discrimination claim, they were in the ADOS having a battle with the FBA. So it was ADOS versus FBA instead of ADOS helping members of their own network. All right. So people will talk about it being lineage. And I agree, yeah. And I understand the galvanizing around a certain lineage. I was raised in California, but I'm not so universally, those people who believe in, oh, we're all one America and shit. No, I believe that each race is still going to have its players who are acting in the best interest of their, whatever their best personal vested interests. They look out for each other, long story short. And in this case, the ADOS, if it should determine that it wants to look out for ADOS, I'm all for it. If the FBA decides it wants to look out for FBA, I'm all for it. Definitely for if they decide, look, there are some people who may not even identify as being ADOS lineage-wise, but they recognize them to be ADOS, and thus they would help them. And I would be for that. Likewise, if the FBA says, look, this woman is mixed with Black and white, and because she is mixed with Black and white, I am on the fence about whether we help. Hey, that would be for them to decide as well. Moses Jenkins, I'm not there. I'm not there with the whole discriminate against mixed people, discriminate against mixed children, discriminate against, the third generation or fourth generation of Caribbean ancestry. My knowledge runs too deep to be that discriminatory. Just not there yet. And I think the end game, or the actual goal that we're trying to fight for, requires a greater degree of focus on what we want to achieve than for us to be distracted by what we feel is a deflection now. If we continue to just focus on the deflections now, and we got to respond to this. Oh, well, they said that. You know me. Oh, bro, Rob, peace, brother, man. After 6 o'clock, man, we can always build. Remember, Brother George did extend his platform to us to be able to teach. And that reconstruction piece, I got your email. I've been following it. I sent you my PowerPoint as well. I'm trying to get like a Google Doc, to be able to share those documents. That way, as we build out our presentation, we can both see it and we can streamline what we think should be inside of the Reconstruction period, which pieces should be included. Me, I go all the way back to 1619, which is probably too much information. It's necessary, but if we want to have a streamlined presentation about the Reconstruction period, it may not be necessary to include all of those slides and all that information. But for us, while we're still bringing together what that presentation should look like, I just figured I'd share the PowerPoint as it is, and then we can determine what needs to be in and what should be out later as we build that out. But thanks for sharing that email. Did get the email, and I do have yours up, and I'm looking at yours as well, so I can formulate my questions for you based off of the information that you have in your slides. All right, so moving forward, this was from a 1999 Washington Post article. I'm always happy to see those. So if you always find them, I don't care what year it was put out. If it's talking about reparations and the debt and all of those things, I love to find them. I would love to have just a catalog of all the years we tried to have this conversation with America and America shut us down. Just a running stream of them, just all the different, from New York Times and even the local ones, the Sacramento Bee, I'm from Sacramento, or Chicago Tribune or Los Angeles Times, wherever it might be. If there was an article that was trying to push the reparations conversation forward on a local or a national level, would love to have all of those. So producer HAC, to my understanding, I could be wrong, biracial are included if and only if they can show a track record of themselves checking black on public documents. Yeah, that's one of the things, right? So when you look at the Candace Owens, I include them because they are relevant. She checks Caribbean for many of her years. And then you'll have people as a part of the Caribbean or in the diaspora who say, well, look, Caribbeans are black too. They just got dropped off on a different ship, but they were still a part of it. They'll say, well, no, they were under the British occupation, as if the 13 colonies wasn't, predominantly British. And then you had Louisiana French, and Florida being Spanish. And so what is your actual point by saying the Africans and where they were dropped off at as being they are not included in the descendants of slavery? Now they had a different experience than the continental, so they find these nuances that they harp on that. I mean, it goes a long way if you're talking about the economic piece and you're trying to whittle down that major list of who should actually receive a reparations check or who should be filing a reparations claim. Everybody can file, all of them. Caribbeans, white people will be filing and saying, look, I am mixed, but I am an octoroon or I'm a quadroon, but I still have an enslaved ancestor. So they might file as well. They may, they're a quadroon. And they haven't identified as black ever in their life, but they do have an American descendant of slavery that they can trace their lineage back to. And you never know, their matrilineal bloodline may continue down the black path or the African path and not the white path. Their bloodline may not even go from its matrilineal side ever back to Europe. But because who they are today, octoroon, maroon, whatever you want to call them, quadroon, they may have only known to identify as white because of their social conditioning. So they may still file the claim and say, I do have an American descendant of slavery. Others would say, when you're looking at a foundational, you're going to have a harder time proving the foundational because you're going to have just a similar hard time proving foundational, and that your people did not receive some form of reparations or access to a reservation. And your struggle is just as real as saying I'm a foundational Negro. See, are you? Just as complicated. They will have to file their own claim, whether they choose to be ADOS or foundational Black American. So don't get distracted with the nuances of it. The politics of it is, well, do we even get to file a claim if it turns into the verses? All right, I'm gonna say that one more time. Do you even get to file a claim? Who would you be filing a claim with? The Department of Justice? How do you get to file a claim with the Department of Justice? It first has to become a bill. How does it become a bill where they need these senatorial meetings? Well, who do you have representing you at these senatorial meetings and these subcommittee hearings? Candace Owens, who claims Caribbean ancestry and says white supremacy doesn't even exist. So the struggle is, while they're having these conferences, delegating who would be the person to better represent us other than a Candace Owens who is obviously misguided. And what are the next steps to replace said Candace Owens from being the representative at these senatorial meetings? And when you have people like John Conyers, who just passed and no longer doing it, or Elijah Cummings, who just passed, no longer able to push forward these initiatives, now you're resting on the rest of the Congressional Black Caucus who ain't pushed shit, and still got many of these members who haven't even signed HR 40 themselves yet. You have the Tim Scotts talking opportunity zones, but aren't talking reparations. You'll have the Kamala Harrises talking Marijuana Act, the CARE Act, but not talking reparations. And you'll have a whole bunch of people talking Democrat versus Republican, but not able to talk about these certain initiatives and bills that are actually going to be on the ballot, such as immigration reform, including medical records at the border. So they could talk about all of this shit and the sentimentality, but what are the actual bills that are for African Americans that are going to be on the ballot, will be voting for or not voting for? What are the actual bills that will be on that ballot? And whose responsibility is it to create those bills that are on the ballot that we should be considering? ADOS and the FBA, by galvanizing their networks, create the conversations and the grassroots campaigns, voter registration drives, and all of these Tea Party type movements that can help determine what should be on those ballots, states and locally. Oh, we want to vote for this sheriff because their last name is Jackson. It's going to get deeper than that. All right. I see Tone Talks just went live, and a brother like myself would rather hear what they have to say than to continue to speculate from my own perspective. And I think I've said enough here. The and is going to be more important than the or, in my personal opinion, but I give a lot of value to the or as well. The one that I don't like is the one that says verse. I don't think they should take any more time trying to make it one versus the other, because it's just not the truth. Both of them have a play at galvanizing around these different concepts, this Black first and using Black media and growing Black media. Both of them have a following that is huge, and that they are trying to get some organizational structure behind. You know, it's the establishment of chapters and the establishment of networks, and, you know, being able to come together as a part of those networks in certain spaces. So if I'm in Atlanta and there are different opportunities, different organizations and professional associations that are in Atlanta that are doing things, the greater, you know, Atlanta Urban League or something like that, and they're hosting these events, how do you get the notification for those events that are there? If it's the Collegiate 100, how do you get notifications for those? If it is people in accounting, how do you get the notifications for those? All of these different opportunities that we have to come together with like-minded individuals that we just may not be receiving the notification for. And the people who are hosting these events are currently waiting on YouTube to send the notification, or Instagram to send. No, how do you build that following if we are actually out and connecting and networking in those spaces? That's important for me, is being able to connect, not just to observe from a distance, but being able to connect. And let me see here. So that was that one. Was there another one that I wanted to share while I was here? Let's see. I am surprised that they are allowing me to share so much. their major issue that they are talking about, and then I'll leave it at this one, is 1866. So this is one side. The ADOS are talking a lot about this Byron Allen case. And we know that that case is important because it talks about 1866. And so if you're talking about 1866 and why that civil rights bill was important, then of course, if you ask a brother like Brother Moses, I'm going to ask you, well, what was the bill in 1866 actually considering? What were some of the precedents or court cases, previous court cases that they were considering? And so on that note, I wanted to find something that was important to add to that conversation because the work has to be done. And Justia is a source, or supreme.justia.com is a place where you can find all of the different Supreme Court cases, and you can go all the way back in time and see what it is that this covenant was trying to establish, and how this covenant amongst men was made law. All right, I'm gonna say that again. This covenant amongst men, how it was established and how it was made law. And so one case that I would like to pull out, and I'm gonna leave it right there, is this Fletcher versus Peck, or you would just call it Peck, or you would call it Fletcher versus Peck, however you would call it. This was back in 1810, and what they were determining is, again, like always, property. And remember, when you're determining property, slaves were considered property. In this case, it was talking about land itself, the actual land. All right. And I like to go over these cases and see what was decided and see the language that they were using, because they were, again, trying to use universal, timeless language. And so I'm going to read a little bit of it, and I'm going to give you a little bit of my perspective on it, just so that we can understand where we're at here. So this syllabus begins: if the breach of covenant assigned be that the state had no authority to sell and dispose of the land. Stop right there. I'm gonna do it one more time. If the breach of covenant assigned be that the state had no authority to sell and dispose of the land. Stop right there. This land and property and the dispersal of land and the authority to declare the use of land, that's what we're talking about here. The authority to, this is my land. Remember, I give you these histories and I try to give it to you. What up, Brother Kenny? Try to give it to you in a way that makes sense. They were giving away hundreds and thousands of acres of land to private people. And that is the covenant, that once you move inside of these spaces as a private landowner, many of those major landowners would become the politicians who became the state or the representative of the state. All right. The governor became the CEO of all of these landowners. These major landowners, you're a landowner in the state of Mississippi. This one was, I believe, Georgia is what they were actually hearing. And so the legislature of Georgia, or that governing body of people who had individual local municipalities, your ADOS, grassroots campaign, again, your people in business, middle-class black folks, your bougie, whatever you call them, boule is the word. All of these people who claim to have a high position, they're in the PTA, they're in the school board, they are your voting people. They have land, they have a little bit of money, they may not have wealth, but they have their own home. But all of those people then appoint somebody to say, well, you represent us as our council member, and you represent us as this. And then those council members then compete to move up that ladder and say, well, I have this many constituents. I have this many constituents who I represent. They owned this much land and they provide this much in tax revenue. These are their major businesses and they do this, that. All right. Stay with me and you'll get this information. These individuals who own and operate a business or land then appoint somebody to represent them and their best invested interests. I believe that there are races, or as races, there are still people who look out for the invested interests of their people. Racism still exists. And the fact that black folks are just now again waking up, this is probably the biggest civil rights case or civil rights movement and the civil rights movement since the 60s civil rights movement. You could talk about the affirmative action and all of that shit, and I say, yeah, and so, but for whatever. But since the 60s, this ADOS and FBA and using digital and online campaigns to drive grassroots campaigns, it is the biggest since they were doing it with knocking on doors, except we're knocking on emails. Hey, Brother Moses here. I'll be going live on. Hey, this is Nyla Says here. I'll be going live on. Hey, Brother George Macon here. Hey, this is Taz of the B1 Network. I'll be going live on. And here are the topics that we'll be discussing. These grassroots campaigns where they used to knock on doors and say, pass out flyers, hey, come out and listen to my lecture, and they might get 20 people. Now it's digital, which makes this the biggest and most impactful civil rights case or civil rights movement since the 1960s civil rights movement and before. Just like the 50s Brown versus Board, again, we have the biggest case. This is a case as big as Plessy versus Ferguson, a case as big as Dred Scott. And we can't talk about it because we have more people who are only attracted to the drama. They are attracted to the verses, ADOS versus FBA. I was watching Yvette last night. There was over 5,000 people viewing. So she normally has about 1,000 to 2,000, but just by adding a versus, and she didn't put it in her title, but just by moving the conversation from ADOS and FBA to an ADOS versus FBA mentality, there was 5,000, an increase of over 250% viewership. Versus. Anyway. I love the marketing. I think that that's an important part of galvanizing the movement. We have to understand that some people will only be there for the entertainment, and we have to placate to that every once in a while, which is why the preacher goes, why he does all of that. He tries to get to that high note that can evoke some sensitivities. He can instill this sense of hope right before that offering plate is passed. That call to action has to come after he, after he does all of that and got the emotions high. He asks you to buy. He says that, let's send that offering plate around, because there is a call to action coming. Whether the call to action is attend the conference or the call to action is to become a leader in your local community on this issue, to create your own chapter or your own network. I don't know what that call to action is going to be. It might be to donate. It might be to visit the website and purchase some memorabilia. It might be to start having the conversation at your water cooler, to chime in and have an opinion, to use your social media, if only for 1 year, to be a little bit more political than you may have been in your previous years, to speak up, to connect with someone who's a part of the NAACP or the CBC or your local chapter or the national chapter. Connect with them on LinkedIn and ask them a question. If you're still a part of the church, to challenge your pastor to use that pulpit to say something meaningful and impactful other than thus saith the Lord. And I know that's a hell of an ask. For some, it's not too much. You got pastors asking for entire jets and shit. Anyway, I can digress and rant all day. I digress. But if the breach of covenant assigned to be, so if you're saying, look, there was a contract that we had, our covenant between men, if that covenant, if what you're saying is the state had no authority to sell or dispose of that land in the first place, what are they talking about? So there's homestead acts. Peace, brother God. Assalamu alaikum, brother. If there is a covenant or a contract that said Homestead Act, remember that left side is this Homestead Act that says the state, the federal government, or some group of people, some group of white people could give you 160, no, let's do the big number, 640 acres, that there is a government or a group of people who could grant you 640 acres inside of a state. All right, I'm gonna lay this groundwork for you. So you 40 acres and a mule people who understand the 40 acres and a mule argument, who understand the Sherman Reservation Act, who understand the authority invested in our military and in our generals. So not our general, but General Sherman had the authority. General Sherman had the authority to say, this land is my land, and with this land, I appoint it duly for freedmen. What the hell, man? I'm getting a whole lot of notifications now that I'm trying to have a conversation. Anyway, another one? Thanks. So land grants. They're saying there was an authority. This court case that went to the Supreme Court was saying, well, the state didn't have the authority. The authority was granted to individuals. Again, this mug is jumping. Hey, y'all let me know in the chat. Is there a lot of people going live right now? Because I am getting, I don't know if these are right now notifications or something I missed from earlier, but they jumping off the charts. Anyway, they're saying the state had no authority to sell or dispose of the land. It is not a good plea in a bar to say that the governor was legally. Remember, the governor is the CEO. The governor represents all of those constituents, all of those city councilmen, and those lower folks who represent all of the individuals who own this land. So if I got 40 acres and Gab got 40 acres and producer got 40 acres and Nyla got 40 acres, and then we appointed somebody to be the steward, not of our land, we'll govern our own land as we see fit. But when it comes to political protection over our land, now we have somebody who comes in. Yes, sir. Now we have somebody who comes in, CRU, and they are the representative of all of our 40 acres. And they represent our municipality. And if you have a number of those that are Black owned, now we need our own governor or our own CEO. So out of all of these Black lands, out of all of these Black media channels, Byron Allen, out of all of these Black media channels, Byron Allen, out of all of these different platforms where Black media is presented and consumed, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, however you say that word. Out of all of these, BET, syndicated talk news, whatever it is, OWN, out of all of these conduits of Black media, or out of all of these places, who is the governor or the CEO? All right. And so they wanted to come in and challenge the governor, and the governor was like, look, man, the state or the federal, all of you people who represent us do not have authority over the individuals inside of my, whatever it is, jurisdiction. All right. It's a classic argument. When you hear the Moors who go into court and they say, well, you don't have jurisdiction. We are our own sovereign nation. That's what they're saying. Reparations debate for the Indians. The Indians claim they have their own sovereignty inside of this great nation. That is a reparations claim. The Jews say we have our own sovereignty. We're our own sovereign people. That is a claim. That is a claim to be recognized by those who you're having this argument with. And so you allow people to move the conversation from reparations claims and the authority to say we have an actual claim, that we had a claim to all of that land that was promised by, Sherman, by that military commander, that general at the time, who those promised lands, and then reinserted by Thaddeus Stevens inside of that Congress. It said these are their lands. We also have African Americans who benefited greatly who may have lost those lands. You had African Americans and their descendants who may have lost those lands. You have African Americans who probably can still trace back that they still own those lands. But for those who had lost those lands due to any injustice, there is a claim. And the claim does not have to prove it was 100% because they were Black that they lost those lands. It is sufficient enough that there were damages. All right, so let me show you where they say that at. So you don't think that it's just me. All right, I'm gonna read it verbatim and then you'll see it as it pops out. If the breach of covenant assigned to be that of the state had no authority, so the state had no authority to sell or dispose of the land, it's not good. It's not a good plea in bar or inside of the courts to say that the governor was legally empowered to sell or convey the premises, although the facts stated in the plea as inducement are sufficient to justify a direct negative breach assigned. I hate the way they say it because it makes it seem convoluted. I like to use it in plain old Negro terms. Basically, in a nutshell, they're saying a direct negative breach. So this is the impact of whatever happened. A little bit of the backstory. When Georgia was determining its borders with places like South Carolina or with those other states, you had people who had large tracts of land. And in your land grant, you may say, well, this is all of my land. And some of that you may be trying to fence in so your cattle or whatever it is, your plantation stretches into places that were designated Tennessee territory or Carolina territory. And so as Moses, my 40 acres, I had 39 acres on the Georgia side, and that 1 acre that went over into the South Carolina side was for dispute. And so my governor would then say, well, my governor gave me all 40 of these acres, so you can't tell me that I don't have the right to this land or whatever I'm going to do with the land in that premise. And they're saying, look, whatever happens for that one acre, you're trying to argue about that 1 acre, right? And you're trying to use that as a counter argument to the what you can and cannot do, or who gave you the authority to the other 39. Hopefully that makes it plain. So in the case itself, the whole case could be about 40 acres. And in this one, it says, well, the state gave me the authority. And they're saying, well, we're not going to argue whether or not the state had any authority. So the covenant, my homestead or my grant, my 40 acres and a mule, my covenant, if the breach of covenant assigned to be was that the state had no authority. So I say, these are my 40 acres. And then the white people who are against reparations say, well, no, General Sherman did not have the authority to give you 40 acres and 40 acres and a mule. That's the real argument. The very real argument is the one that says, well, General Sherman did not have the authority to grant you 40 acres and a mule in the first place. So therefore, the government is not responsible for any actions that happened. So they're arguing, well, the state did not have the authority. And they're saying that wouldn't be good to say, because the governor is legally empowered to sell those lands and do whatever on those premises. And so they say, is it sufficient to justify a direct negative of the breach assigned? So the breach assigned that they're actually contending for would have been that 1 acre that was on somebody else's claim to invalidate the entire 40. What do they go on to say? It is not necessary that a breach of covenant be assigned in the very words of the covenant. So General Sherman did not have to say, and if whatever happens after this breach, XYZ. Generals do not have the authority during war. Oh, generals do have authority during war. Absolutely. It is sufficient if it show a substantial breach. It is not necessary that a breach of covenant be assigned in the very word. So it doesn't have to be inside of the covenant. If there is a breach of contract, this is what happens. So in many of our contracts today, let's say I become a YouTube content creator and I join the B1 network as a co-contributing author to the B1 network. And in joining as a co-contributing author to the B1 network, we work out an agreement that, when it comes to monetized information, if I am a co-contributing author on a monetized a show or a live stream or information that we create and present, that as they are the proprietor of the channel, they are receiving 50%, and then as a contributing author, I'm eligible for up to 10%, and then super chats or something like that, and I can get 100% of my cash apps. So all of that. And if there is a breach of covenant or a breach of contract, what happens if I don't receive, my 10%? What they're saying here is that it's not necessary for them to have written out that breach of covenant, that what happens if I don't receive my 10%. But if there is a significant or a sufficient breach, all you have to do is show the substantial breach of contract. So when I look at that, that initially tells me that if you've established that there was a covenant, General Sherman said that this land is for the freedmen. This land, these 40 acres and a mule, are for these freed slaves. So he laid out a court case and said all of this. He designated an exact land. It wasn't the best land, but he designated that these are the lands that will be for those folks. So there is an actual covenant between the general of the United States Army, of the Union Army, and the people who to which he had formed said covenant. He went as far as to get that covenant signed in blood or whatever it is through the political process. 40 acres and a mule became a thing that was pushed. It went from 1862 and Confiscation Act and all of these other bills and appropriations and how do we get there, all the way through to Thaddeus Stevens also pushing this same reparations type agenda, but one that looks at land as a contribution or as a distribution means of reparations. So you show number one, was there a contract? What was the contract? Everybody, when you talk about 40 acres and or reparations, this is one of the key talking points. 40 acres and a mule. Was there a contract? So number two, did he have the authority to create said contract? All right. Does the state, does the governor, are they legally empowered? Again, I go to these because I need the actual language. What is the language that is used? It is not necessary that a breach of covenant be assigned in the very word. So there was nothing there stated that, and if black folks do not receive this, it is sufficient. This is the Supreme Court. Again, the Supreme Court will be deciding tomorrow a different but related topic. It is sufficient if it show a substantial breach. Can we show a substantial breach in the contract? Whose job is it to show the breach? Are we waiting on white people to show the breach? Are we waiting on American descendants of the slave master to show the breach? When we go to the Senate and subcommittee hearings, just like what Candace Owens actually did do, she said, open up your records and show me this legacy of white supremacy terrorism. Show me that. Show me all of your records of criminal prosecution or criminal cases where there was racism or racist leanings and how those cases were investigated and prosecuted. Show me the history or all of those records of police cases where white supremacist terrorism was enacted against black people in America or against others. And they could not do it. You have the CIA, the FBI, and all of those different people in there. And they found out that there wasn't a data repository that had collected all of that information right now. They would need conjoining of a number of different state and local police databases. And Officer John was called to a domestic violence claim where a black man was beat and assaulted by his white wife. And she beat that nigga ass. He called him a nigga while she was beating the shit out of him. And that was racism based. And she divorced him and took half of his money. I'm on an RBR moment right now. That was an RBR rant. And that shit just tickled the hell out of me, though. Damn, racism and domestic violence. God damn. Hey, bro, I'm gonna have to look at that. Domestic violence cases amongst swirlers. And was it racist? Hey, I'm crying. Is it racist? And all they can say is the same thing that they say in these reparations debates. I show you I use satire. They can only use the same information. Look, you chose to be with that white woman. So if she beats your black ass and calls you a nigga while she's spanking you and then takes half of what you've done, it was your choice. Integration was your choice. Yeah, they passed the laws, but it was up to you to determine whether or not that would be what was in the best interest of you and your people. When the migration happened and there were jobs up north, you knew you would be leaving the Jim Crow South just to make your way up to the Jim Crow North. When you got to the North, if you still faced race-based legislation and discrimination, that was just a risk that you would have to assume. See, what they do is they absolve the guilt of the guilty party, which is the people who are inflicting race-based discrimination and using race-based legislation to dismember you from your rights as a citizen. Now it's about you and your choice. You chose that white woman. It's not about the fact that she was beating your ass and calling you a nigga. While she was doing it, man, that shit is hella funny. Anyway, at the same time, if you chose to try to use the system for what that system had, and so you tried to go to the police for your safety, and they got a mob of 30 to 100 people, and they went right inside of that, they used the same, they had the address of the police station. And they went inside that police station and told the sheriff and the deputy on duty that you're going to let that nigga out, and we gonna hang that nigga, we gonna string that nigga up. So you tried to use that system. You ran to the damn prison. Or they said, this is the best way that we can protect you. And all of the lynchings that Brother George Macon and I have pulled out, there are thousands of lynchings that never were able, they knew the lynching happened. They celebrated, they made postcards of it. It made it to their local news. They weren't even ashamed to advertise that they had just killed them some old Negroes. And we can continue to find that information. But until we get to the point of taking that information and saying they weren't prosecuted then, and we still hold you liable, American, you are still liable for the prosecution of the descendants who are still benefiting from those actions, those lynchings, those murders. Those multi-million-dollar lawsuits for those thousands of cases of lynchings that they advertised and promoted. The 30 to 300 people that would form a mob and use mob justice to snatch our black bodies even out of the prison. And they couldn't find equal protection under the law inside of a prison, guarded. If they couldn't find equal protection inside the prison and definitely didn't find equal protection at the point of sentencing, if they couldn't find equal protection under the law when it came to the contracts that they were entering or exiting, then damn it, whose job is that? How do you investigate? We keep pulling out these facts and these bullet points, but what can we do with our bullet points if we have a ADOS versus FBA rather than an ADOS and FBA, or even an ADOS or FBA? Which, what am I saying? I'm saying the institutional structure, the network of an organization to be able to reach out to members of the ADOS and be able to push forward a claim. So I show you that less than 1% of the housing discrimination cases that use the appropriate system were actually prosecuted or went towards a resolution. Less than 1%. And I show you that we have an African-American who's over the HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And I show you that we had an African-American who was the Attorney General at the time that these cases of discrimination weren't being prosecuted. Then for that reason alone, you can't keep telling me that, well, we just need to vote the right black person in. Or maybe we're voting in the wrong black person. I'm telling you, we're using that system and it is not being to our advantage. So what do we have other than creating a better network? Again, I am not the biggest proponent of the Congressional Black Caucus or the NAACP. I have a lot of slights with them. I feel like the movement has been co-opted by LGBT and the other agendas and immigration. I'll say it specifically by the diaspora, LGBT, and immigration have co-opted the National Negro Advancement or the National Advancement Association for Colored People. That it's no longer for African Americans is what I'm going to tell you. The bottom line is it's for everybody, or as many people as they can be towards now. So if you're trying to do everything for everybody, then what are you actually doing? And show me your numbers. The same way we went to them and asked them for all the records of white supremacy terrorism, or the same way Candace Owens went and asked for all the records of white supremacy terrorism in America, we have to go to the Congressional Black Caucus and the NAACP and say, open up your rolls and show me your real impact. I don't care if you lost the case. Show me where you even tried. Show me your failure, that the next generation may be able to learn and grow from even your failure. Oh, they don't want to show it because they know I'm going to talk some big shit. I mean, big shit. I'm talking big shit. I'm talking institutional big shit. And I'm laughing like the same way that I can laugh at the black man who decides to swirl. I can laugh at the black man who told us to integrate into this burning house. And for the last 60 years, when you look at the record of civil rights advancement, I want to chronicleize the gains of siding with you and of you being the leader or the impromptu leader, you being the person who is legally empowered to be a representative or an authority over the things that matter in black lives, over our contracts. You represent us. We are your constituency. Show me your impact. And I mean numbers. Show me your impact. And I want to see the significant, substantial impact. Not none of those feel-good cases where we tried to help Sally Mae. Motherfucking big impacts. So let's go on. The court will not declare a law to be unconstitutional unless... Rock with me. I'm back on the information. I don't know if you can see it as clear as I can. So let me see what happens if I zoom in one more time. Does it get big enough to where I can see it on the screen? That's Indica. Don't worry about that. She just want to be on the live stream too, because sometimes I think Indica be saying shit that makes more sense than some of these folks. All right, so I'm right here. So again, what did the Supreme Court say back in 1810 using some of its precedents or some of the cases that it used to determine the 1866 Civil Rights Act? From there, we look at some of the cases that they determined. This case is about property. Remember 1866? One of the big things was the 1862 Homestead Act and determining how to distribute land via the Homestead Act. Again, Sherman appointed 40 acres and a mule of that big Sherman reservation land. Can we give land to these Negroes? And now you have 1866 in contracts, the freedmen or the emancipation of black men, freedmen moving onto land. Can the state or can the governor or can the government give land to these freedmen? And so they go on to say it's not necessary that the breach of covenant be assigned in the very words of the covenant. It is sufficient if it show a substantial breach. We have to take that same language. It's not on us. It's not beholden upon us to say, look, when Sherman made this idea that freedmen are entitled to this land, Sherman was an authority. You agree with that, right? Absolutely. He had the authority to go to Atlanta and deploy a scorched earth military policy that said, you better evacuate Atlanta. This is General Sherman. He said, you better evacuate Atlanta because I'm coming to burn that bitch down. I don't care what business you own. I don't care whose side you on. He said, nigga, I'm a part of the Union Army. And when me and my army and my troops of people come and the sons of our private landowners, again, when we come in and I am implement, and they nailed it on people's doors. If you come to this motherfucker and you are still in the city of Atlanta, you're dead and they're burning the motherfuckers down. That's what General Sherman said in Atlanta. Now, if you remember the Sherman story, he also then marched all the way to Savannah, Georgia. And there in Savannah is where he met with the 20 black pastors and other folks. And that's where this resolution or the 40 acres and a mule comes from, where Sherman was like, well, look, I got a whole lot of land on my own reservation. How about he asked the black pastors, what should we do? The black pastor said land. And he said, well, I got all of this land as on my own reservation. How about I give that to you all? Would you all be able to be a self-sustaining sovereign nation if you had the land to do so? And they were like, yeah. You're like, well, it's not the best land, but they were like, well, we'll take it. And that's a good start. So those pastors and Sherman established a covenant for land in the Sherman reservation, thus the 40 acres and a mule argument. So when they say, well, we don't owe black people shit, tell them to look again. Look at the land that is being occupied by people who were not under the covenant assigned by Sherman and those freedmen. Anybody who is not what you would say ADOS or FBA or however you call it. But under that covenant, for that 40 acres and a mule should not be occupying the land of the Sherman Reservation. But you have Hilton Head. And you also have, now I think Myrtle Beach may be just outside of it, but I know for sure you have Hilton Head. And if anybody has seen Hilton Head, it's going to be a hard ass conversation to convince them, the people who claim to own Hilton Head, that they are in violation. And it's definitely going to be hard as fuck to get the United States Constitution and the white men who wear those robes. And, you know, the one woman, I think we have Sotomayor who's on there who may be for it. But that nigga that's on there is definitely not going to be for it. It's going to be hard as hell. I don't know what they're going to decide tomorrow. That's just one piece of it. But to get them to agree that there was a covenant and Hilton Head is in that covenant. Hilton Head is a part of the 40 acres and a mule or the Sherman Reservation. And that is ours. That is our right, or that is our claim. As descendants, start there. What was the actual covenant? What was the breach of that covenant? So the court will not declare a law to be unconstitutional unless the opposition between the Constitution and the law be clear and plain. So we got to spell that shit out for them. The legislature of Georgia in 1795 had the power of disposing of the unappropriated lands. So again, in South Carolina, did Sherman have the authority to appropriate those lands within his disposition? We say yes. Just like here, based on this precedent, where they determined the legislature of Georgia in 1795 had the power of disposing of the unappropriated lands. So they could create land grants and they could assign private ownership over those unappropriated lands within its own limits. Again, read this how it needs to be read for us. General Sherman had the power to dispose the unappropriated lands inside of the Sherman Reservation. You don't get to say, well, now Hilton Head is rich today. Hilton Head is a thriving tourist destination. Hilton Head has multi-millionaire yacht clubs there. Hilton Head has big industries there. Hilton Head has all of this infrastructure there. You don't get to say that because it's built up and developed now, we no longer owe you. No, that's that's down the line. That's still ours though. Thank you. Now have a good day. What happened in 1862 that they don't want to talk about now? The Confiscation Act, where the government said, well, look, these lands had been appropriated. And if you don't want to get your ass out the way, the government gave itself the power to confiscate those lands. What do we know it as today? Eminent domain. When they want to build a highway or a freeway, when they want to designate something a national park or a historic site, they claim it and that's that. But y'all want us to believe that only works in favor of white people, that the law is blind, or that the law only recognizes when white people use these damn tools. Fuck out of here. Now, again, that does make me a hypocrite because I am still asking to be married to the same system. And again, it's going to be hard for you to say, well, you're asking those same people or like they like to say, begging. That's their word. It gives them the impact they like it when they appeal to be, oh, you begging the white man. And the white man didn't give it to you then. So what makes you think they're going to give it to you now? That's how they like to detract you away from the actual information. No, this comes from your Supreme Court that you are subjugated to the laws of the Supreme Court. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. There is a covenant that is established for you to continue to operate in any of these spaces. And should you decide to violate or to say, you know what, I am my own sovereign, then you're going to either have to be like the Native Americans or the indigenous people to actually declare yourself a sovereign. Jewish, you're going to have to declare yourself a sovereign people. And you're going to have to make that resonate. And then again, I don't care if you call yourself a sovereign ADOS, sovereign FBA. I don't care about that lineage argument. Sovereign African American or sovereign Black or sovereign Moor or sovereign Hebrew, sovereign Israelite, sovereign Muslim. Whatever it is that you keep deciding that you want to keep thinking about, stick to the facts. Are you looking for restorative justice or not? Let the people work out what kind of sovereign title they want who like to focus on that shit. But for the rest of us, we got work to do. So we established the precedent using the previous precedent for the 1866. In a contest between two individuals claiming under an act of legislature, the court cannot inquire into the motives which actuated the members of that legislature. Again, if you want us to go in there and say, look, we want reparations because white people are racist and they hate black people, we're not going to win like that. That is not a victory. Likewise, now hear me here. This is the double-edged sword. Likewise, the 1866 case, or this case with Byron Allen versus Comcast, that's exactly what they're trying to do with their double talk. They're trying to tell you if you want to raise a case of discrimination, whether or not it's discrimination in employment, housing discrimination, or just discrimination in general, that it has to be 100% because of the fact that you're black. Racism. That's the side that Comcast is taking. And Byron Allen is saying it doesn't need to be 100%. It could be 80%, 90%, and it still should not overshadow the substantial impact of the decisions that's being made based on race. And that's what they're deciding. The Supreme Court is deciding tomorrow. Again, you see the same precedent when they were talking about land. So this is still a contest between individuals. Byron Allen is an individual. Comcast is owned and operated, publicly traded, but it's still somebody. Individual, corporation versus corporation. However you want to look at it. But they have their grievances that they take to court. The Ninth Circuit heard it. They ruled in his favor twice. Ruled in his favor, I think, 3 times. Now they pushed it to the Supreme Court. If the legislature might constitutionally pass such an act, if the act be clothed in all the requisite forms of law. So we can tell you, look, the rape, you know that the rapes were illegal. You know that the property theft was illegal. You know that the murders were illegal, but yet you did nothing. We can tell them all of that. We got that information, but how do we leverage it? What are we actually asking for? An allegation that the act is a nullity and a consequence of impure motives. What happens with us? We'll get to the court case and we'll finally be heard, and we go and all we have is, but it was racist. And so we're talking about the impure motives. Why did the police shoot that guy in the face? Because he's a racist. Why did, when she knocked on the door looking for directions, why did that man shoot that woman in the face? Because she was black. When it was, the music was too loud, why did he shoot? Why did he shoot at them and kill some of those people in that car at that gas station? Because they were black. Tamir Rice playing with a gun or BB gun. Why did the police hop out and just shoot? Because he was black. So in their favor, they can say, no, it wasn't 100% because he was black. It was 90% because he was black. They can even admit it and say it was 10% because I couldn't tell whether or not the gun was real or not. And so they walk. And they're making us say, no, it was 100% because he was black. Tomorrow's case, as they are deciding, is whether or not it needs to be 100% or whether civil rights can still be based on the fact that, yeah, it was because he was black, but not 100%. If Byron Allen wins, then going forward and possibly going backwards, we can consider civil rights cases where it was because they were black and some other things. If Byron Allen loses tomorrow, then going forward and in reverse, requires 100% double talk here, 100% proof that it was because of racism. I see you, Brother George. I got this last little part that I'm gonna share, and then I know Brother George making this live with some content that him and I had created previously, talking about some of the lynchings and things. Part 2 of that, where we actually show the receipts of the lynchings, and these receipts are valid for anybody who feels they can have a conversation about reparations and so forth, and the necessity of reparations or restorative justice for even those families or those descendants. So you had families who had the consequence of losing loved ones to an unjust criminal justice system. One where if an African American was convicted of a crime, they lost a breadwinner as a part of their family, an uncle who could have been providing some assistance to his niece when she was young and needed a couple of dollars for groceries and such. But because the unfair criminal justice system locked her uncle up for all of those years, they lost a major contributor in their support system. And that young lady was now dependent upon the government and could not depend on her own family for support when she needed it and when she started having babies and such. And so we have African American women and men who are dependent on the government now for their livelihood. They are dependent on the systems. They are dependent for a job. They are dependent for even an opportunity. And it is because of the denial of access to industrialization, to the land, to those major ports that would have allowed us to sustain ourselves. The one that I like to start at is this covenant, or this Sherman's reservation. I start there. And until I've exhausted the Sherman's reservation and talked about Reconstruction enough, that will be my talking point. So again, when a law is the nature of a contract, when absolute rights have vested under that contract, a repeal of the law cannot divest those rights. So this is for my brother George Macon, who likes to always tell me that they killed that president, and then when the next president came in, the next president provided amnesty for those traitors to the American nation. And he granted those original, I don't even want to say original, that gives them too much credit. Those landowners, those slave masters, he said that those slave masters had a right to their land back. But when you look at this case, it says when a law is in the nature of the contract, when absolute rights have vested under that contract. So when the right between General Sherman to give those lands to the freedmen and allow those contracts to vest, again, you'll look at it from indentured servitude. They said if somebody was indentured for 7 years and they've done that, they fulfilled the rights to that contract and the land is theirs. They wanted a way to argue that stuff, and they went to court or whatever, and they said, yeah, you have to recognize it. That man is now a freed man. He's no longer an indentured servant. He's free to own land and operate. Similarly, that freed man who received a part of this covenant, land, or a part of that contract, this is the part that kills Brother George, his argument, rather. A repeal of the law cannot divest those rights. So it goes on to say, this is what I would like you to take away, that even though the next president came in and said, nah, I'm going to grant amnesty to those landowners, that granting them amnesty did not absolve the ownership or the contract of those lands from being the freedmen. The freedmen still had the rights to those lands, would be my argument, and that the repeal or that granting amnesty to those landowners did not end that contract or the land for those freedmen. Thus, the descendants of those freedmen, or the contract was breached by the federal government, showing their complicity. The contract being breached was unconstitutional for them to appoint. The executive power did not supersede the judicial power. So they did not have the power to overthrow the power of General Sherman and his order or his bill. So therefore, it was unconstitutional to say the landowners had a right to those lands. That under military law and the military contract, the general did have the authority to appropriate those lands. And once appropriated, it's done. Those lands, that 40 acre and a mule, is ours. And that it was unconstitutional when President Jackson or whoever the next president came along and said otherwise. A party to a contract cannot pronounce its own deed invalid. So those freedmen could not say, well, nah, this ain't my land. I just surrender it. So what happens? Those slave masters come in and they use the get down or lay down tactic that says, no, this is not your land, Negro. You really think that our government ain't going to protect you. What happened? The Freedmen's Bureau. What happened? They send down more military people to help enforce the rights. Then what happened? Those federal agents or governments and military people were pulled out of the South, and thus those landowners were then able to exert force and use murder and domestic terrorism to then get these people, the freedmen, to pronounce their own deeds to those lands, those 40 acres, invalid. But what does it say? A party to a contract cannot pronounce its own deed invalid, although that party be a sovereign state. So what did they try to do? Again, they'll tell you that they came in and these black men signed off their own land. They said this was back to us. Anyway, a grant is a contract executed. A law annulling conveyances is unconstitutional because it is a law impairing the obligation of contracts within the meaning of the Constitution of the United States. Andrew Johnson, appreciate it. The obligation of contracts. What happened after that? They had to come in and make a U.S. constitutional law that said black people have the right to enter and exit contracts. They had to have it recognized, but it shouldn't have to be recognized. We are just two individual parties. But unfortunately, these are the battles that we have to continue to go through. So we now have to tell them, they tell it and make the onus on us, brother Taz. They make it about us. They say we have to find all of the records of freed African Americans who had land in the reservation or land as a part of the Homestead Act. We have to find the records for the African Americans who had land, and we have to find the records where they signed off their contracts or their deeds to that land. And they're making it about us. We have to find the exact white supremacist terrorist or business or organization that came in and took the land from them and showed a breach of contract. They make it about us, rather than us being able to say, look, the government was complicit and these were the laws that allowed those white people or empowered those white people to go in and steal all of these lands en masse. That they did not have the constitutional right to do so. And therefore, they are not only complicit, they are liable to the reparations of those lands. Again, 1862 Confiscation Act. 1862 Confiscation Act. So for us to be able to look at the 1862 Confiscation Act, they're asking us to then look at the 1862 Confiscation Act, track down the actual records of all of those lands that were confiscated, identify by, I guess, lookership, where anybody named Jackson must have been black. Anybody named Johnson must have been black. Anybody a Jenkins, if there are Williams and their names are on these rolls, they must have been black. So we're going to highlight all of those names and show the black people and show the outcome of what happened to their homesteads and their lands. They're trying to make it about us rather than saying that this is the government complicity and this is where your responsibility is. So again, Candace Owens going and saying, show me the record of white supremacy terrorism. Show me all the accounts where white people were brought up on charges or where files were made against white people for racist acts, whether it was at work or whether it was in the communities, where a white person drug a black person on the back of their truck, where white people burned a cross in front of a church. Show me all of your records where these instances happened. And they said, well, we can't do it, and we don't have said records, and that information is not available to us, and we don't have a linked data set from the local police stations to diverge that information. And they made every excuse under the sun, and they couldn't even go back to the 1990s on the history of domestic terrorism and white supremacist groups. So whenever these major events happen where they kill 6 people or 40 people or 50 people and a white person kills people, the first thing the FBI says is, well, there is no link to domestic terrorism or domestic groups. This is an insulated incident, because they will never give themselves the obligation or the responsibility of holding themselves accountable and accountable and liable. And so we have work to do. Now, my approach is to use the law as they exist. I go to the Supreme Court justice cases. I find the ones that were the precedent for the ones that, when they actually said, okay, civil rights, 1866, these are some of the areas that we'll consider. I look back at when Abraham Lincoln came in, 1862. What was everything that he considered important, and how much of that had to do with the African American? And now that I'm going into a 2020 election cycle, everybody can talk about voting all the fuck they want. But when I open up that ballot as a thinking person and I look at that ballot, what am I going to be naturally attracted to? You could show me a picture with 70 people in there. My eyes are naturally going to gravitate to where the niggas at. If I walk in a room in corporate America today, my eyes seem to naturally find the 1 or 2 other niggas that's inside the whole room, and I'm going to give them the head nod to acknowledge it. So when you tell me to vote, I'm going to open up that ballot and look all the way down that ballot and try to find anything that pertains to me as an African American. Now, whose job is it to actually put something on that ballot worth voting on? You get reparations on the ballot, I'll vote, motherfucker. How about that shit? And if you start having the conversations from the lens of what are we doing to organize in order to ensure reparations is on that ballot, then I'll watch your motherfucking podcast. Shit, I'll even join the membership and get an email notification. I'll read your newsletter. I'm somebody that goes so far into it, I will donate to support, black politics. Right now, I support black business, but if you want me to support black politics, give me a reason. And the reason won't be because I talk about politics every day. I don't give a shit about you talking about politics. I don't even like politics, first of all. I think that's a rigged game. In most cases, I think that you're wasting your damn breath trying to convince white people to be nice or to play fair. I think that justice is a foreign concept to the white person, to a European society. I think justice is a foreign concept to a European. It's just too foreign. They will never grasp what humanitarian or humanity actually means. That is too much to ask of a European, if you ask me. Just way too much to ask. There is nothing in me that when this legislation was necessary, the reason it was necessary is because the Europeans were acting against the better interest of humanity. That was the only reason why it was necessary to have this conversation in the first place. Because they couldn't work it out. Absolute rights. Why is it necessary to understand what absolute rights really means? Let me do this. This will be the last thing that I do, and I'm going to jump off because, I know that there are some other people who are having these conversations. Absolute rights. The absolute rights are those rights which can be neither restricted nor restrained under any condition. Usually reasonable limits are placed on most rights, but international human rights law recognizes few of them as absolute. What are the absolute rights? These rights are absolute. Absolute rights include your right not to be tortured or treated in an inhuman or degrading way. Your right to hold religious and non-religious beliefs. Is that all you got? Even if that's all they got, let's start with this one. Your right not to be tortured or treated in an inhuman or degraded way. When was this established as an absolute right? Oh no, somebody has 10 basic human rights. The Indian Constitution, are all rights absolute? What about the UK? Anyway, I'm done for now. Go on over to, I don't know who else might be live, but I know Brother George Macon is live. Feel free to join over there. There is a premiere part 2 of these lynchings. If you want to know what absolute rights and why that's important, then you have to understand that there still, to this day, is not an anti-lynching bill on the books. So they'll tell you that there is an absolute right that says the right to human decency and not to be tortured or killed, but they still will not put an anti-lynching bill on the books. So I know on that presentation, him and I broke down a few of the lynching cases that happened here in America. Keep that top of mind, man, or keep it in the back of the mind as we continue to have these conversations. If you need anything that can drive you towards the passion you need when you're having these conversations with other people and you want to reason with them and you want to start listening, you want to hear them out, and you want to show the decorum that's needed in these spaces, you want to be, have cordial conversation about it, but they're saying something that continues to drive you and it continues to trigger you. What it actually might be triggering is that part of you that understands lynching, that understands it. And so the show that Brother George Macon and I gives you actual names. So once you listen to the entire show, if the only thing that you're able to do is to list out those names and to say the names of those people who were lynched, if there's 4 or 5 or 3 or 4 that you'd like to include, you include those 4 people and you drop them, you name drop them. And then you say those are just 4 out of 3,659 cases of lynching between 1930 and, or what was it, like 1920 and 1947, 3,600 and something cases. And out of all of those cases, zero cases were prosecuted. So you got 30 and 100 people in a mob going and participating in the lynching of an African-American and killing them. And out of those 30 and 100, none of them were prosecuted. But today you have a conversation around guilty by association. Police can pull up on the neighborhood and hop out and arrest everybody standing on the block just for being guilty by association. Probable cause and suspicion. You can just hop out and arrest African Americans when you had mobs of 30 and 100 going and lynching without any prosecution. And so if you needed the actual names, drop 3 or 4 names, and you're able to say the thousands of cases of lynching that happen and why it's important to continue to promote ways and means to achieve restorative justice. And what does restorative justice look like? Restorative justice could look like, look, you killed Stephon Clark, and for his babies, you gave around $2.5 million in a settlement, where there are thousands of cases still on the books where you have not decided to pay the descendants of those folks. So reopen either those investigations or just say without investigation needed. Because real restorative justice would mean that 30 to 100 descendants of lynchers would be the people brought to justice. And that's what they really don't want to do. That's what the black folks really don't want to do. So that's why they might join the FBA, because it takes off the word slavery. Because they don't want to look at it from the lens of victimhood, the American descendants of slavery. They don't want to look at, oh, I don't want you affiliating me with slavery. So now you got to join the foundational Black Americans, because now you're not a victim there. You're not a victim of slavery. And so you can still feel vindicated and a part of an association as a part of the FBA. You're not a part of the NAACP. You're a part of the FBA. And this is lineage, but it's also an organization. And it's also a people that are doing good work. And you can connect with your people like another damn fraternity. And you got your people that you can call on. And you got people that are part of the FBA that are doctors and engineers and lawyers and teachers and business people and business owners. And those are your people that you're connected with as a part of the FBA. And you can either make a phone call or a tweet and you're instantly connected to thousands of people to where your message can actually resound. And I don't give a shit whether you use the ADOS or the FBA. And just as long as you have a network that you can connect with if you needed to push forward any claim. Because we know right now the status quo is if you try to apply for a small business loan, even if you're accepted, it's going to be a small loan. But the odds are, under the current system, if you just tried to use the system as it is and applied for a small business loan, it's going to be a small loan, and that your acceptance rates are low. That they have to create diversity and inclusion programs and minority business investment opportunities. And that's what the Congressional Black Caucus was supposed to be focusing on, or the Chamber of Black Caucus was supposed to be creating the opportunity, and the Congressional Black Caucus was supposed to be expanding on said opportunities. That was supposed to be economic empowerment for the entrepreneur, the Black entrepreneur, and the advancement of Black entrepreneurs. But if we use that system right now, they're making no gains. But you be a dreamer, you can get an education. Be a dreamer, you can get a house, you can get a loan. Oh, leave these dreamers alone. That's what they're focused on today. And boy, I'll be preaching, man. This shit has been an hour and 40 minutes. I've been saying I've been leaving for a minute, and I ain't left yet. No, they go into it. The proclamation of the King of Great Britain in 1763 did not alter the boundaries of Georgia. Remember, 39 acres in Georgia, that 1 acre in South Carolina. The contention was about the whether or not the king even had the authority, or the governor even had the authority to uphold that land grant. And then they tried to make it about that 1 acre somewhere else versus the 39 acres. The nature of the Indian title is not such as to absolutely repugnate or to secede, whatever that is, cessin, sizing. I know seismic is dealing in the size of it, so they're trying to find the scope of a thing. In fee or the part of the state. So again, do you make it about the Indian? Do you have the right to give Indians land? Do you have the right to appropriate reparations to Indians? Does the governor, does the state, do you have the ability to designate race-based land grants? Is that even something that you can do? The question whether a law is void for, go ahead, sis, void for its repugnancy to the Constitution, it is all times a question of much delicacy, which ought seldom, if ever, be decided in a doubtful case. The court, when impelled by duty to render such a judgment, would be unworthy of its station, could it be unmindful of the solemn obligations which the station imposes. But it is not on slight implication or a vague conjecture that the legislature is to be pronounced to have transcended its powers. So you're doing too much. You are doing too much, Comcast, to try to make it about 100% race. Well, it's not absolute. Your absolute rights. It wasn't absolutely about his race, so therefore we aren't liable. Get the fuck out of here. It wasn't absolutely about race. Question, do you have the ability to create race-based media or race-based networks? Telemundo. Can you do something that is specifically for a race of people? And if the answer is yes, then what is its significance? Can you do a little bit? Can you do a lot? Can you invest millions, or can you only invest 1,000? Comcast, I'm going to invest $70 billion in white-based media and European-based media. Also, Comcast, I'm only going to invest 15 million in black media, 70 billion in white media, 15 billion in black. Can he create a case that says that's racially it's kind of fucked up? Supreme Court justice says, well, let's look at it. Anyway, the opposition between the Constitution and the law should be such that the judge feels a clear and strong conviction of their incompatibility. So I'm thinking on tomorrow's decision that an absolute racism, what do you call it? Standard, the burden of proof. An absolute burden of proof of 100% racism is incompatible with the law. That's what I'm hoping that they side with tomorrow, the decision. That an absolute 100% because of race burden of proof is unnecessary. That is what we're looking for as our victory. A victory for Byron Allen is a victory that says it is not necessary to have a 100% race-based burden of proof, so that it must be 100% based on race. That is the victory we're looking for tomorrow. While we can talk about ADOS and FBA, don't forget what we're actually debating here. Don't forget the talking point. Don't forget that this is an actual civil rights case being determined in the Supreme Court for justice in perpetuity and what restorative justice looks like. Don't forget that shit. And so Brother Moses may jump in and try to do the research and find any other Supreme Court just cases that are looking at property and the rights between private versus state and state versus, well, that's a right for the state. Many times the Supreme Court just says, well, the state has the right to determine. The state has the right to determine, which now means the governor. And so our cases have to be against the governor. And then you may have Comcast, which is national, but your state versus Comcast. This is a case of a private versus Comcast. Anyway, the state of Georgia and covenanting with the title of Georgia was a grantor of brings in action of covenant. So Georgia does have the right to grant those lands as assigned as a breach of the legislature were induced to vote in favor of a law which the Constitution by contract of being promised, and that therefore the act is mere nullity. This solemn question cannot be brought thus collaterally and incidentally before the court. It would be indecent and extreme upon a private contract between two individuals to enter into an inquiry respecting the corruption of the sovereign power of the state. That's hella funny. I was watching the James Baldwin verse, what was his name? Buckner. I think it's Buckner. William Buckley debate had me crying. And the first thing that Buckley does is come out and he says, well, Baldwin is trying to make a case against the sovereign power of white supremacy. I was fucking crying when I watched that shit. Anyway, if the title be plainly deduced from a legislative act which the legislature might constitutionally pass, if the act be clothed with all the prerequisite forms, sitting in a law or the court of law cannot sustain a suit brought by one individual against another founded on allegation that the act is nullity and consequence of the impure motives which influence certain members of the legislature which passed the acts. If a suit be brought to set aside, a conveyance obtained by fraud, and the fraud be clearly proved, the conveyance be. Oh, okay, so I like that. So in this case, this is where they're starting to set that precedent that says, look, it's not about this, this race. For me, anyway, it's not about race. But can you show me the actual fraud? So when we go in front of the courts, we can say, look, these motherfuckers were racist. But can you actually show where their racism led to disparate impact? So their racism allowed for them to target disproportionately African-American homeowners or landowners. So out of all these land grants and all of these million acres of land that had been appropriated, your first thing to do is to come and say, well, they didn't have the power. Sherman didn't have the power to appropriate the land. He wasn't an authority. He was a general. That ain't real. The 40 acres and the mule wasn't real. And so we showed them that, yes, it was real. And it was an actual covenant between a general of the United States Army and the freed people. No one else applies. If Captain Tazariak was here, it'd be like the same definition of that Bible. It's talking to Israelites. This doesn't even apply to the rest of you motherfuckers. So why do we have the debates among ADOS and FBA and pro-blacks versus conservative blacks or liberal blacks? Why do we have the debate amongst us? Because it doesn't even have shit to do with the rest of them motherfuckers. I don't have to go on Fox News and debate them. I still got to have the debate amongst African Americans who don't think that they're a part of the covenant. This covenant was for you. And as a descendant of them, of the freed men, this is your covenant. Captain Tazari, I could tell you at that School of Universal Practical Knowledge that this Bible is a covenant amongst Yahushai, or the Most High, with the people of Israel, his people. All these other nations don't got shit to do with that covenant. So if we're saying in this reparations debate, or in restorative justice, or restoring the ideals of American citizenship, or whatever that might be, equal justice under the law, or equal protection under the law, citizenship rights, the benefits of citizenship, however you want to put it, American citizenship, we are all Americans. Both of them use the term American in there to establish nationality. So we're saying African Americans had a respected place as a part of America, that we had a contract, we had a meeting, shit was supposed to be squashed, that there was a war fought, and even that war was fought in many parts to represent this covenant. And this covenant, if you look at all indicators, was about the distribution of land. This covenant was between, what do you call it? And I hate to do this to you. I hate to do it. But the sovereign power of America, or the manifest destiny, or the divine rule or authority of one governance, of a supreme court, in being able to determine law for the people, one covenant of governance, is that there will be a ruler and there will be a citizen. There will be a representative governance, but that there is a ruling that will be going on. And inside of the Supreme Court, they determine the ruling. Now, you could take it and call it a semantic argument or a double entendre, but there will be a ruling, and there is a ruling class. And there are people who literally own millions upon millions of acres to which we all reside. And the banks can be a data repository of accounts. I'll say it again. The bank or the treasury can be a data repository of the accounts, but you still are not the sovereign owner of those lands. What would make you the sovereign owner of those lands is when no other can claim those lands. So the argument is, was Sherman and Sherman's reservation, that land, is that his? Did Sherman have the right to grant that land to freedmen? Are you a descendant of that covenant between Sherman and those freedmen? If your answer is yes, then I don't give a fuck if you say I'm ADOS, FBA, Moorish, you could be Islamic, you could be from the School of Universal Practical Knowledge, you could call yourself black. I myself personally distinguish myself as a NIGGA. I'm your motherfucking nigga. Call me what you want, just don't call me late for dinner. I don't know about the whole establishing yourselves as a sovereign nation argument. I'll let somebody else have that conversation. But was there a covenant or an agreement and a contract? Did the people going into those contracts have the right to enter a contract? Can we now get to the point of saying, well, we are responsible for our own rulership? Now, these facts on facts on facts. And the fraud will be clearly proved. The conveyance will be set aside as between the parties. But the rights of the third parties who are purchasers without notice for a valuable consideration cannot be disregarded. The principle asserted is that one legislature is competent to repeal any act which a former legislature was competent to pass. So when you have the conversation with Brother Moses, I will look at the 13th legislature or the 15th legislature or the 50th congressional legislature. I'll look at the current congressional legislature, that legislative body. Now, we know we never really had a high amount of representation. We may have had a few influencers like the black cabinet. Those were influencers. We may have had a couple of black senators. We have a few that are representatives and such in Congress over time. But that the legislature or the governing legislation, 13th legislature, 14th legislature, 15th legislature, they come together and they create bills and agendas that determine what should happen with the land and how it should be divvied up. Many of those, they allow the states to determine whatever their laws or rules will be governing said lands and property rights and what can happen on said properties. Oh, you caught the reference too. Wait, now that was 40, dusted and disgusted. We had a meeting. Shit was supposed to have been squashed. This shit was supposed to have been squashed. See, I used that same reference. It went over some people's heads, but B1 Network, Taz caught that shit. I plagiarized the fuck out of E40 right there. Dusted and the motherfucking disgusted. Hey, now I got to talk about it since you caught that shit, Taz. Gang culture in Northern California, Oakland, the drugs and all of that shit. We know that it was a port of drug activity, pimping, and all of that shit. And as thus, it was profitable. Drug business, profits. With the drug business, once you cut it a couple of times, it becomes even more profitable. The street value is worth a hell of a lot more than the origination value of whatever said drugs you'll be bringing to the market. Oakland was a hell of a market, very profitable. They found ways like ghetto dope, how to cook it, how to cut it, how to make it the most profit out of it. And magazine and street hustlers and all of that, magazine street hustlers, a group of people there who could benefit in these open markets and free markets if they were in fact free markets. Now, of course, 70 miles away in the capital, Sacramento, we may not have had the direct port prices, but the drug business was also available there. And so it was another market. And it was probably even better for the people who had the original markets because they could earn a little bit more since whatever products they had that they wanted to bring to the market. Look at me gangsta-splaining right now, man, explaining this gangsta shit. Gangsta-splaining, Negro-splaining how this shit worked for these motherfuckers. And so because there was a market there, they could charge a little bit more to get those products to that market, which was Sacramento. And yet in Sacramento, we were still under the influence, being a military base, where we had certain families. Remember, I talk to black folks, so fuck all of that. In our black community or in our black spaces, we had predominantly two groups of people. Those families that came because they were able to receive the military roles, the military bases opened up, military jobs or jobs that fed into it. We had McClellan Air Force Base, and many of the families in Del Paso Heights or Strawberry Manors, they were families that was a part of those military. And then you had them foundational Negroes who had been there for a long time. But with that, a lot of people, once they lost their jobs in Los Angeles, or they didn't stop in Los Angeles, they moved all the way up to Oakland, or they lost their jobs in Oakland. That's where you had those transplants there in Sacramento, California. Other jobs and opportunities and things once they were established, but the families there were either military or original. In our neighborhood, Strawberry Manors, Del Paso Heights, where I was raised at, two neighborhoods side by side, only separated by one major street. And those families that claimed each set and its set of blocks. I'm from the 3500 block. There was 36, 37, 38, 3900 block. And then on each of those blocks, those families, as you may have identified, may have went down 3500 block gangsta, blood if you were a blood, Crip if you were a Crip. Anyway, all those blocks, those two neighborhoods predominantly, and then the rest of the neighborhoods that had similar problems. In my little small space, it was either the Heights or the Manors. Separated by one street, that was my everyday. Those were the gangs. Now, why was that important? Because controllership, or the numbers, those street soldiers and those gangs, then determined how much you had to cut your profits in order to distribute in those markets. I'll say it again. The power of your people inside of those families. If you were 3500 block blood and y'all were able to distribute inside of your little market there, X amount of product, 3600 block, X amount of product, 3700 block, X amount of product, 3800, X amount of product. Why? Because they closed down McClellan Air Force Base. And those people who were used to having a certain amount of income and being able to afford a certain amount of expenses now have to find an alternative. And if you're not dependent upon the government anymore, or while you were dependent upon the government to provide it and everything was good and peaceful so you could fight against the drug dealers, now guess what? Your aunties and uncles, people who could have been there to supported your upbringing as a young child, they could have, the football programs, the basketball programs, baseball year round. You need uniforms. You need to be able to travel. All of those different things that money helps with, a bus, maybe. Even involvement, parent participation, the tax base for those neighborhoods. If you stripped away the predominant feeder into those neighborhoods, the employment or economic base of those neighborhoods, what do you have left? Where is your tax base that the schools are dependent upon? What happens if you live in an area that is predominantly dependent on government and government programs or government jobs, i.e. the military? Do you know what it looks like outside of military bases? How much prostitution and whoring goes on? I'll give you a deeper one. Even the military wives, they say 60% of military wives can face underemployment or unemployment. 60% of military wives and military spouses, underemployment or unemployment. You know what it looks like outside of those military bases when you're in an environment that is predominantly dependent on the government? They shut down McClellan. McClellan was an Air Force base. It provided most of the jobs. Those jobs gave you the tax base to keep your community thriving. Without those jobs, without those taxes, what happens to your schools and what happens to those families? And where do they find their source of income? In my neighborhood, may crack like this ghetto dope. So what happens? You have all of these families that end up feuding. And at some point they had to sit down. They had to say, look, enough is enough. We got to stop killing each other. And so what I gave you was just a snippet, what I plagiarized rather, was just a snippet of one of those songs on Dusted and Disgusted. E40, who was from the Bay Area side, I'm from the Sacramento side. My family prior military, my family impacted by the loss of jobs from the McClellan Air Force Base. My dad being Army, had been getting out of the Army around 1989-ish, something like that. Why did my dad get out? Probably too much information, but it was marijuana related shit. Not even for him, for his goddamn stepson, his wife, my mama's first boy. Long story short, my family history not on display, but of course I would always be an advocate for marijuana now today, as you see the traumatic experience that I've had. We lost the primary source of income for not just our own individual unit family, but my aunties worked at that same McClellan Air Force Base. My grandmother was able to work at a school that was dependent on the tax revenue of those parents whose children went to those schools, but they worked at McClellan Air Force Base. And so she's able to sustain her family because she serves lunches to these students, these kids, these sons and daughters living on the 3500 block, 3600 block, 3700 block. What happened in Oakland? Black Panther Party. Well, we need to start establishing our own mills. What does my grandmother do? She works in a space where she can establish mills. But if you take that away, and so the point of reference is we had a meeting when the Bloods and Crips, so those people who were on the 3500 block, started fighting for that market, or when the market that was on the 3500 block was not producing the numbers to sustain the livelihood of the number of families on the 3500 block. It then became time to try to find other sources of income. And those sources of income for people on the 3500 block required things such as buses, light rail, bike trail, sidewalks, God damn it, street lights and stop signs. The very bare minimum things that people might look at today and say, oh, damn, y'all didn't even have the appropriate sidewalks and bus stations and bus stops to accommodate an entire neighborhood of people who have to leave their neighborhood now in order to find jobs. And if you have to leave your neighborhood to find jobs, then you're going to need transportation. And if you live in a part of the city that doesn't have an active bus, like we used to have that bus 87 that used to take us all the way to downtown and beyond. We used to have a 15. My kids don't know the experience of getting up and walking and running 3 blocks, 8 blocks, however many blocks it took to get to that bus. And don't be late, or you will be late. But having to take public transportation in order to get there, in order to even get public transportation to go to the neighborhood, takes Black first mentality and perspectives. In order to have jobs for those people once you get off of that bus, takes Black first. You're going to need somebody who says, look, man, we ain't hiring enough niggas. We got 16,000 people. Why the hell we only got 3 Black people in this room? You're going to have somebody who thinks like me. Somebody who's able to break down some data and say, look, man, out of all of these damn jobs, your salaries, you probably spend about $3 billion on salaries. You probably spend about $199,000 on Black salaries. Like, what the fuck is that about? 199,000? You got 3 people? Ain't that about a bitch? I don't think there's anybody that's that egregious, but understand that we are still up against a system that spends billions of dollars in the salaries of white people and probably 5 million on Black people, 6 million. Less than 1%. Turn that shit back on, man. 2 hours and 5 minutes that I've been going live. I know most people could probably only listen for a little bit of time. So if you've been rocking with me, I appreciate it. Hey. B1 Network, Brother Moses, man. We deliver content. There's a lot of channels that you can be on. I'm glad you decided to come over here and rock with Brother Moses, man. Be sure to like and subscribe. Hit that bell notification. This information may not always be for you. Sometimes this information you might have just been the conduit for. So share that information with a friend. Let them know that we do have conversations. We do have a network of people who are we are unapologetically Black, and we are not ashamed to have these conversations. We will have conversations as deep as they need to have them, but don't get it twisted. We are about that information. B1 Network, man, we got work to do. Shalom. Who do we have rocking with us? We have the B1 Network live classroom. That is one of the best classrooms that I like to go to on YouTube. Brother Taz exclusive B1, the GOAT, the king of content. I'll give him the claim, the fame that he has, but I'll give him his credibility, man. I'm still looking to prove it wrong. Show me somebody who does better content and I'll maybe consider it. But right now, that's his title and that's what he holds. B1 for life, man. That's my guy. Kenny Conjo. That's my guy. Jamari Shalom. That's interesting. From that avatar, I don't know if that's my guy or my sister, but we'll keep it rocking. George Maker, too, who is live. Little Miss Chocolate, always someone who comes and rocks with me. I am pretty damn gangster. Good to have you, as always. She's known me since I was about 12 years old. What up, gangster? That is the dopest Ethiopian. Producer was rocking with me, gave y'all some valuable chat comments. Appreciate that. Bro Rob and I will have some content that we'll be delivering on. Work with us in the meanwhile as we're in the back chats. He gave a shout out to Dr. John Henrik Clark. Man, we need more people who can do that. We must understand the political meaning of history. Yes, sir. Hey, we try, brother. Who else? I know Sister Nala Says was in the chat, man. CRU, who should be sending me some information from my shows, man. We're trying to get to that professional network, so we're just testing and seeing now. But once we get there, we're going to need brothers like CRU, who does music production, to bless us and give us those good bless up rates for music production. on these future live streams. O'Shea Linux was with us. Appreciate that. That's my OG, my elder right there. Gab Talk Medium. If I needed information about the Nation of Islam or about being a Muslim or how would a Muslim, what is there any laws or anything from a Muslim perspective that he could give me some insight on, that would be the person that I call. He's a bit more accessible than Brother Ben X, who I also admire and who I could also reach out to on social media. I would probably direct my comments to the direct message of Gab Talk Media. In his greeting, Assalamu alaikum, he did give that greeting back and say wa alaikum salam. And I'm still even learning how to greet people by the greeting they would have us greet them with. Sun Ray was in at the very beginning, our brother out of Australia, letting you know that we do have an impact on a global scale. Brother out of Australia who rocks with us on a lot of our channels as a part of the B1 network. Salute to him. Indigenous also joined us. So shout out to everybody that joined us in the live stream today. Appreciate you and your good works. Continue to go out and do what you got to do. Keep hitting them up top they head, literally bust their heads. Sometimes, hey, Nyla, sometimes you're going to be like, man, fuck these motherfuckers, man. You're going to be like, fuck them. I'm tired of this shit. Taz, there will be times where you're like, I am tired of these motherfuckers, man. But you got to keep that fight up, man, because we know the real enemy is not going to give it up. They will not stop saying, look, it's over with. Why are you guys still asking for reparations? We still got African Americans who are like, why are you still begging them? We still got people who don't understand the courage of a Thaddeus Stevens, that white boy. And they would probably give more kudos to the Thaddeus Stevens and his courage to say we need equal protection under the law, but they won't research any further and see how big of a missed opportunity that was. And they will shun the hell out of us for doing this research or bringing this information out and keeping it lit. Yeah, we could talk about entertainers. We could talk about celebrity. Yeah, we could talk about ADOS and its leadership. We could talk about the FBA. Absolutely. We could talk about the Congressional Black Caucus and its failures, the NAACP and its leadership that is moving in the wrong direction when they make immigrant rights and the diaspora more important than the brothers who are right here with us every day. But if we can't tell them, look, we're breaking down these constitutional precedents. We're looking at these cases that happened in the early 1800s. We're looking at the constitutional precedents. We're looking at the legislative body in 1862, the one that laid out the premise for Civil Rights Act of 1866. And we'll tell you what was on that legislation body. We'll tell you about the banking. We'll tell you about the banking notes. We'll tell you about the Confiscation Act. We'll tell you about all of these acts. Now, you as the people who have the ear of these politicians, take that information and make it money. Make that money work for us. Stop talking about bullshit and make these talking points make money for us. If it doesn't work for me, make it work for our grandchildren and our children and our grandchildren. But damn it, make it work. They got to give us that. We don't do this shit for fun. We don't do this shit for free. This shit is a heartbreak. We come together and we bring this information, and yeah, we go through the muck and the rigmarole of going to like the manosphere and cutting their conversations to shit. Rather shut down a whole motherfucking page and make them shut me down. Turn my shit off. Don't send out a notification to me before I let the truth just go unheard, before I become muted. Let the white man mute me, not the black man. The black man, you gonna have to whip my little ass before you think I'm gonna shut down the real information. You out your goddamn mind. Because we got work to do. No, I don't shut down, I don't report black people's stations. But what I do, I will disrupt and agitate the shit out of your content creator. That's what I'll do. And until they want to debate me on any of these facts, debate the facts, until that's what they actually want, until they want the Morehouse debate. Because again, Howard University can debate Harvard, and we can beat the hell out of Howard, but that does not mean that you can't beat me in a debate. I will give you that. Come see me about something.